Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. Before we get into it with our guest here today, I'd like to remind everyone if you enjoy this content, please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Chantal on the podcast. She's coming to us from the West Coast. Hey, I got her name right, everyone. That's the one thing. I told her ahead of time. I was like, okay, I was a little worried here, but we did. So that means this is going to be a really great episode. But yeah, she's on here to share her health and fitness journey and just discuss all things health and fitness. But most importantly, she's our current guest. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This is really exciting.
Well, I normally talk about the weather, but like we said, we kind of had a mutual agreement ahead of time that we're not even going to talk about it because it's just in that rough time of year where we're just, looking out my window right now, it is just ridiculous. But before we get into everything, why don't you just first off give us your backstory on what inspired and motivated you to adapt this lifestyle and how it led to where you're at right now?
I mean, in the beginning, it's kind of boring. It's like everybody else's age-old story. I've done sports like my entire life, basically. And then about high school time, I'd say I was 16 going on 17. It was my junior going into my senior year. I used to run professionally for the Junior Olympics, and I got really injured, like put me out of service for 14 months. I had to do hydrotherapy for I think another 5 months after that. And I had ended up rupturing my bursa sac in my hip. I tore my hamstring in 5 different places. And then there's a tendon that comes across that I severed. So needless to say, I was out of commission, lost a scholarship, the typical boohoo story. And it really was the pinnacle of my life changing because you identify yourself as an athlete when that's all you do 24/7, especially as a child or a teenager, because what else do you really have going on minus some family responsibilities or something? And I didn't really have the best household environment at that time. So that was where I was able to put my mental, and it was kind of ripped away from me. I became a pretty sour person, if you could imagine, by the end of that. But I found a wonderful physiotherapist that helped me over the course of another year after that kind of regain my strength. I was learning how to walk again. Not I had to walk with crutches for forever. So I was learning how to walk on my own and all that stuff. And he basically told me if you don't get back into shape and rebuild your muscle, you're going to be full of ailments when you get older because of how severe some of these injuries were. So really it was just PT that got me into it. And then by happenstance in a gym, I saw a female bodybuilder. She was a bikini athlete and just stunning to me. I was like, I've never seen someone look like you in real life. She was close to competing. So, the shreds, the veins, the striations, insane looking. And she was telling me that her boyfriend and her were coaches. So I started with them. You learn a few things about what makes a good coach and what makes a bad coach. And then I learned they weren't the best coaches, and that's okay. I think they were still learning too. And then I found the coach I have now, and the rest is history. I fell in love with the process.
Well, I love that you talk about the whole coaching thing because, yeah, it is so much learning that goes into this sport that a lot of people just don't understand. They just want that quick fix so easily, but it's like, I honestly wanted to rename this podcast Trial and Error once I really started interviewing a lot of the bodybuilders because that's really all this sport is. But did you have any knowledge at all about bodybuilding before you really got into it? Or was it one of those things where you just said, okay, that's fascinating, I want to just give it a try?
So I had very little understanding. Back when I was younger, you still had magazines and you had the muscle stuff and you had Dorian Yates on the front of it and all that kind of stuff. So I knew for the men what it was. I really didn't understand that women could do it too because it's just not placated to that much, especially back when I was a teenager or a kid. And then seeing her in real life, it was like seeing an Amazon warrior in real life. I was like, oh my God, women can be that shredded and that jacked in real life too. And then still being new to it, the more I dove into it, yeah, I just became fascinated. I was like, this is really a compounding of sciences put together. This is not some easy thing that people can just do on a whim. It's a lifestyle, for real.
Well, before we dive into that, I do got to say, because I hate cardio more than life itself when it comes to the running, it's a necessary evil for me. I go on walks, which is fine, but being that was your life for a long period of time running, I always find this fascinating because there have been quite a few amount of ex-runners I've talked to. What did you get out of that? Because to me, running seems like a nightmare, but what was it? What was that like for, I don't really know how to word this. What did you get out of it that was so great? Because I have had a runner's high every once in a while, but I just see that. And just because I'm so naive and dumb, I'm just like, okay, that just seems like hell.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it sucked. I don't like running, which is, you would think is counterintuitive to being professionally running. But to be honest with you, I guess just being in sports my entire life, and most of the things I did weren't really team related. I guess like running, you are on a team, but you're running for yourself. Like your time's the fastest. It's not really dependent on anyone else. And I just like the discipline of it. I guess in a bit of a masochistic way, I like that it was hard and that I was good at something that was hard. If that sounds right.
No, yeah, absolutely. That was, I mean, it's like if it's gonna be easy, then everyone would do it. So, and I can trust me from firsthand experience, I can tell you, running is not, it's not easy. I hate to bring her up all the times, but I have a girlfriend who's a dietitian. She also does like half marathons, and she's an absolute psychopath, but in the best way possible. Where you want to go on a run? My answer every time, nope. So maybe one of
Absolutely.
these days she'll drag me out there, but not happening so far. But I mean, getting into bodybuilding, there's so many things that the general public does not understand about this sport, which is why I love to bring it up and have a lot of guests on the podcast to talk about it. What was one thing that you wish you had known about this lifestyle before you dove into it?
Ooh, that's a good question and slightly loaded if I'm going to be honest with you. If I had to pick one out of all of the things is to do your research on finding a coach that actually knows what they're doing. A lot of people will say they're coaches and aren't. They've either competed themselves and they
Can
think
I just gotta interrupt you? I hate those people that do one show and then they're like, okay, yeah, I'm a certified coach now because I competed once. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, so I would say that's my biggest uh, want is to make sure if I could go back in time and correct my younger self, like don't just hire the first person that looks good. Like she looks good for her, but does she know how to make you do that in the safest and most efficacious way possible? Considering that I also want my health and longevity to be considered too. And a lot of people in this sport don't really consider that. Well, it's getting better now, but when I first started, it was not that way.
Believe me, I've been talking to guests like you for about 5 years, and it has been getting incrementally better year by year. But there are still some people that you're just like, God, they really do not care, do they? But it like I agree with you 100%. It has been slowly getting better, but I also love to talk genetics on this podcast because everybody and their brother has a different body type. I've always made the joke like your husband, I could train and eat just like him, and there's no way I'm going to end up looking just like that. Everyone's just built differently. Everyone always has that one body part that they really, really don't have to train as much. It just takes off and explodes. And then everyone always has that one body part that just drags behind. They have to train to oblivion. What was your body part that really took off? And what's been your body part that you've just had to drag behind?
So if you could imagine, because of my background in running, my glutes and my legs have always been my strong point, and which, to be honest with you, is a bit surprising because I'm really tall. I'm 5'9", like flat-footed. So when I'm on stage and in heels, I'm like 6'1". So I'm a really tall person when I'm up there. And to be long-limbed like I am, muscular legs is kind of hard to come by. I mean, overly muscular legs because you're tall. I would say the one thing that was hard for me to grow was my delts and my back. My back, I just had no connection with whatsoever because I didn't really use it for anything prior to bodybuilding. So I'd say it took me like 2 or 3 years to like actually understand how to utilize the parts of my back when I'm doing certain workouts, and then actually seeing growth took even longer. But we got it to where we needed it. It just took its sweet time.
So you can't tell from here, but I'm 6'3" myself. So the
Nice.
moment that you said, being tall and having that lower body, I just wanted to hang up right now because I'm the exact opposite of you, where it was my back and then my legs. I've made the joke I could inject pure muscle into my calves and they won't find a way to grow. I mean, it's never going to happen for me, and I have just accepted that and moved on. But yeah, and I appreciate that you're one of the taller guests because I've talked to so many people, and that's the one of the misconceptions that I didn't understand is that they are not usually the tallest of people. When I went to my first show, I found it hilarious, but not like in a like in a mean way, but like how I would go up to some guests that I had on and I could dribble them like a basketball if I wanted to, just
Yeah,
because there's that
absolutely.
short. Like there's one where I did a group photo and I could have rested my elbows basically on the top of their heads and then just been like, but it was that to me is one of the more impressive things too when you see people that are that short though, but they're just that like
Stocky. Yeah.
stocky and you're just like, okay, that's ridiculous. That's why whenever I have a taller guest on that's still, stocky as well, I'm like, okay, that's awesome. But yeah, so I had to get the genetic question out of the way because it's now you're making me feel even bad now I got to look at these legs now the rest of the time I'm talking to you. I should have wore jeans so I wouldn't have to deal with that, but hey, we all we all make mistakes here. But how long into your journey before you decide, hey, let's give a show a try?
Ooh, immediately. I saw her, and to be honest with you, I shouldn't have done it that way, and I should have been coached otherwise. Because, mind you, I had a lot of experience in the gym, but because of my injury, it had been a while since I was actually able to push myself and do anything super seriously. So seeing as I'm a coach now, I would have looked at me and said, let's give you like a year or two and just build your physique up and see what's going on first. Then we can kind of pick a category that's fitting and make sure that you have one, the muscle mass, but you know what you're in for. But I signed up. I think I trained for maybe like 6 months and then I was put into a prep, which is not the way I would do things. But back then it was like, hell yeah, this is exciting and it's happening right now. Little did I know, like, should have done it the opposite way, but that's okay.
What was that first prep like for you? Because for all the training and all the preparation that you can do, once you turn that switch on for that first time and you get into the depletions and you get into the all the cardio and the sleep, everything that goes wrong with it, what was that experience like for you the first time going through that hell, as I like to describe it?
Yeah, it was definitely, it's a hit or miss. Like it was new, but at the same time it was also very not new because running, you have to show up for your trainings and they last like 3 hours long. So it's not too far from like what a prep looks like. But I will tell you, what made that prep so challenging wasn't really anything on the inside because I had the gear, luckily, from being an athlete to take all the challenges that came with it. Was like I said, I didn't have a very solid family foundation and I was not very well supported in that journey. And that made it so hard. Like there were points in time where I was told to put like my food in a separate area. I was pushed, like if I went grocery shopping, it had to be like on my own terms. And financially, it was a really hard sport to get into because it is a rich man sport, unfortunately. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that either. But yeah, I would say not having the support system was harder than anything because when things got hard, like when I was in peak week and stuff like that, I was talking myself through like mental breakdowns and I don't look good enough. I'm not lean enough, the whole shebang. So that was probably the hardest aspect for me to tackle.
I will tell you the one thing that inspired me to really delve deep in this sport and really get a lot of guests on was when I found out, like you're talking about how it is sort of a rich man sport and the fact that you're not going to make money doing this sport unless you win the Olympia, basically. That's when I realized I was like,
And even
okay,
then,
yeah, well, even then, yeah, too. I mean, it's like, it's ridiculous. That's when I sort of was just like, okay, these people put themselves through that for that little fine, for that finite amount of money that they might win if they're, the best in the world. And that's when I was just like, okay, that's a special type of dedication that you don't see in any other sport, because any other sport, you're financially compensated very
yeah.
well if you're one of the better ones at the thing. So that's what really got me into it. But I do got to ask, tangent wise, what was your diet like when you were running? I'm fascinated when you said that.
Yeah, so you'd be surprised, you got to eat a lot when you run because you're expending so much energy. And then the training was also really hard too, because for sprinting, they put you through a lot of endurance training, which makes sense foresight. But while you're doing it, like, why am I running miles to sprint 100 meters? But, science is sciencing. So it worked out. But oh my gosh, I ate like probably now back then I didn't understand how calories worked. I was just given like a it was a meal plan and then with categories of food I was allowed to eat like of carbs you can have these foods and of proteins eat this kind of situation. But I had a pretty good understanding of food at a younger age. But I was eating probably like every 2 hours, like huge meals, like cream of rice, oatmeal, steak, chicken, like almost like a bodybuilder meal, if you will, just eating constantly. I was having protein shakes left and right, just like to make sure I was eating enough. But also, when you're that young, like you just do expend a lot of energy because you're growing and you're maturing and you're just feeding like two furnaces at once.
God, do I miss those days when I could just have a milkshake and a hamburger, 2 or 3 times a week and not have to worry about it. That's the one thing that shocked me because I did have someone who used to run for the Olympic team and then became a competitor afterwards. And they were talking about like, yeah, I still had milkshakes like bi-weekly or like twice a week. And that was the most shocking to me. But then when you really do think about it, you're like, yeah, they're expending so much energy. But I do got to ask now because I normally don't ask this to other people unless they have my type of skin color, which is just like you can tell right now. Look at the sun, how it reflects and makes
Yeah.
like it's like that bad. What was your process like with the tan? Because like 5 layers for me, I've never even tried to imagine how many layers it would take, but it would be ridiculous for me. So what was that like tanning for the first time?
Yeah, so the first time, it was like a little bit of a mishap because I didn't understand the process of it or like how dark you're supposed to be and like how drastic it looked on me because I am like see-through white. So that was interesting. But then the more shows I did, I started to understand. I started to do my tan myself because the companies themselves just kind of like rush you through the process, and if you mess it up, you have to like make an appointment or find a booth, and it's just a nightmare. So I started doing it myself and I learned that it's like a 3 day process. So I have like a base tan that I do, and then I do like a second coat that I don't wash off, and then I have like the top coat that goes on. And it's like a 3 day process of making me like that bronze stage color. without it being patchy or streaky and like weird looking on me.
Well, and here's a problem. I've so you're gonna be the first person to hear this because I've never admitted this in person, but I sweat a lot too. So that's another reason why I couldn't compete on the list of reasons. So I would just be a walking, like one of those
Melting.
mosaics. Oh yeah, melting, which is just it is terrible to think about. But hey, it would be the thing. But like you mentioned before, your family life. What was your friends and family's reaction like though when you first announced to them like, hey, I want to give competing a try?
So my mom's always been my biggest supporter. She's like my best friend and everything. And she's like, "Oh, I'm not surprised." Like it was basically only a amount of time before you found the next hardest thing to do and tried it because it suits you so well. Everybody else, either they made fun of it or didn't think I was actually going to do anything with it because they don't think they understood it was a long process. It's not like, "Hey, I'm going to do a show and then next weekend you do one." It's a process. So, but I was made fun of a lot and ostracized because you become obsessed with it. It does take over your life to where like I wasn't going out and hanging out with them, and if I did, I brought my food and my jug of water, and like I was the weirdo, and so they were like, if you're gonna be a downer and like not party with us, like just don't come. And I was like, cool, I'll be at the gym. I'll be getting jacked.
Oh yeah, I've always found it funny when the family members are like, "Oh yeah, Miss Healthy over here," or something like they try to make fun of someone that's doing something. I mean, I get it too because it is such a demanding sport and it does take up so much time that I could get if you didn't really understand the lifestyle. Like I can go both ways on that where yeah, you're really betting yourself and doing yourself, but I can also get from the other side as someone who has never competed but has talked to so many people compete. I can understand why some family members might be like, okay, yeah, that's just and they might say it's threatening too, because like, yeah, you do look amazing, you do look incredible, but then they don't understand how much really goes into it. But let's be honest also, you're not the average looking woman. If you're to walk out in public, dressed the way you are right now, you are going to get some stares, especially, well, I will say with your husband too as well, you are going to get some stares just because
Yeah.
it's your stereotypical gym couple then if you guys are like in the store, like shopping and stuff. What has that been like? Because I equate sort of being like a mini celebrity where you're just going to draw people's attention just because it's human nature when they see something that's not the normal to just be fascinated by it. What has that been like? And has it gotten easier as you guys have progressed more and more into the sport to sort of deal with that? Or is it still one of those things where you're like, okay, this is weird how many eyes we're drawing?
To be honest with you, good question. So it's very obvious with my husband because he's 6'2", 260. Like he's just a big person.
Jesus.
Yeah, he's a big person. And I'm 5'9". I'm like 170 pounds right now. And like we're just not small people on average. Like take bodybuilding out of the equation, we're big people. So now that we're muscular, especially when we're in prep and we look a certain type of way, you do just get like the gawks. And a lot of people will walk up to me and ask me like, "What are you competing for? Like this looks super cool," and crazy stuff. So in the beginning, I didn't look as crazy as I do now. I was a lot smaller and a lot skinnier. So I don't think it warranted as much attention back then. But now, um, yes, it took some getting used to, but we also expect it because like we know what we look like at the end of the day. Outside the body dysmorphia, we know what we look like at the end of the day. And it's not like your average person, but it got a little mixed because in California, it's a pretty common sport. So the gyms are usually really full. It's not uncommon to go out. You don't see a lot of bodybuilders, but you'll usually run into like one or two. It's not super uncommon. But funny story, let's side tangent. We went to Oregon just to have like a vacation, and it is not a thing out there. They're very obviously outdoorsy. They bike, they rock climb,
I will
they
say I've
do.
talked to maybe one bodybuilder from Oregon, and it's
Yeah.
definitely not. Yeah,
So we went out there and we were like spectacles to behold. Everyone was like, "What do you do? Like, where are you from? What is happening here?" Or they just like plainly would not approach us because I think at the same time, it can be very intimidating to some people to look a certain way. And then on top of that, we both have a lot of tattoos. I have a gnarly RBF when I'm out in public, unfortunately. So I don't look approachable, but I'm very nice. So yeah, it definitely took some getting used to, but it really wasn't that obvious until we went to the airport and then to like another state, and we're like, we really are not the normal. Like we look weird.
I will say I have an RBF myself, and being 6'3", one of my favorite things in my entire life is seeing people's reaction when I first talk for the first time. They realize that like, oh, this guy is just a big teddy bear, basically. Like he doesn't really. That's one of my favorite, especially like women. Like if I'm shopping and then I'm like asked like, oh, where'd you find that or something like that. The moment that they hear that voice and they're like, oh, I can let my guard down and stuff like that. Like it's
Yeah.
like that's one of my favorite moments to be. But yeah, it is fascinating. And I normally save this question for the end, but you do have a lot of tattoos, and I've been fascinated by tattoos. I haven't gotten one myself, but I might get one of these days. Hopefully, my parents aren't watching this. But what are the meanings behind them? Especially, I got to do the arm sleeve first. What's that? What's the meaning behind that one?
So I have the whole left side of my body sleeved.
Okay.
And you're going to hate this answer. None of my tattoos have really any significant meaning. I've always loved them. I thought from like a super young age. You didn't really see them a whole lot, and if you did, they were like alternative. And I was, when I was younger, I was your normal, really awkward scene kid. I had the terrible hair, the gauges. I still listen to death metal to this day. Like, I'm just the oddball. So they've always just been beautiful to me. And I knew way before bodybuilding was a thing that I was just going to be like tatted to the gills at one point in my life. The piercings, everything like that. So I got a lot of my tattoos before I started competing, to be honest with you. I probably would change that if I could now. Not that I regret my tattoos, I love them, but I will say it is quite a traditional sport. So I've had every color hair you can imagine. I've had it buzzed. And when I competed, the tattoos, the short hair, like I had like a gentleman's haircut when I did my show. And I placed well because I had the muscle and the physique to back it up, but I could tell it wasn't like I was being judged again slightly for just not fitting the stereotype of the long extensions and the no tattooed bodies. I will say though, tattoos are getting a little more popular in the sport, which makes me feel really happy because it's a muscle contest at the end of the day. So,
As you were putting on more and more size, did any of the tattoos stretch out a little bit more and you're like, okay?
I would say one kind of on the side of my leg a little bit. It doesn't look bad, but I have comparison pictures from like when I first started my journey to now, and I send them to my coach all the time. And you can just see it's a big rose, and it started going from like the long way to like kind of sideways looking. And I'm like, okay, yeah, it's getting a little big, but that's okay.
I just remember the scene from That's My Boy where the guy gets a tattoo when he's like 12 years old, and then when he grows up, it just becomes super elongated and super long as he gets like taller and taller. So I was just thinking of that for a second. But you did mention that you love death metal, and obviously, if you're a lifter, that's basically one of those things. And I mean, I was looking through your Instagram right before I had you on just to get some videos and photos to use as visual aids when you're talking. And obviously, you do a lot of squats and everything, but I do got to ask, if I don't even know how I could present the scenario, but like if you were told that you had to max out or something bad would happen to, or anything like that, what would be the one song that you would have to use to pump yourself up if you were given like an entire playlist to use a song to pump up if you had to max out?
Unholy Grave Birth by Infant Annihilator, 100%. So anything Infant Annihilator, but that song in particular, I talk a lot about it because it's just like my comfort song, but like in a rage kind of way. Like I just know if I listen to it, I can get my brain where I need it to be to do some crazy shit and work out. So it, without a doubt, yeah.
Okay, 1 second here, but I got this stuff recently. So last Christmas, my little brother, he said, "Hey, I got some smelling salt. You guys want to ever try it?" I'd never tried it a day in my life. Have you indulged yourself in smelling salt before?
I've done it once because I used to do powerlifting very briefly. Like I wouldn't even call it powerlifting. I had a coach. She was phenomenal. Love her to pieces. I just fell in love with bodybuilding more, and they don't really cross over that well, if I'm being honest with you, for a certain point in time. And I was squatting with her, and she brought out her smelling salts because she's sponsored.
When you're dieting down for a bodybuilding show, do you ever have that wish where like, God, I wish I'd do powerlifting right now just because you can eat whatever you want?
Yes and no, to be honest with you. I'm cool with the diet, to be honest with you. I don't mind being hungry every once in a while because I appreciate how I look when I'm starving. But I miss heavy lifting when I'm in prep because I lift really heavy on average. And even for like high rep ranges, I'm a little stronger than I'd say your average bodybuilding female, although they are getting incredibly strong. Especially for, I used to do bikini. I switched to the category of wellness. So I got to be a little more free with my heavy lifts, with my squats and my deadlifts and whatnot. But when I'm in prep, it's just not fruitful to do that. So I miss the heavy lifting portion of it.
Oh, believe me, I know. So, but my first year of doing this with the bodybuilders, I used to ask like, "What's your max lift?" And then after a year, I was like, "Okay, I'm not going to do this anymore," because they were getting stronger and stronger. It got to a point where I was like, "I'm not even going to try." So, I will say though, my smelling salt story, I accidentally put my nose way too close to it the first time I did it. I've only done it once other time again, but it was close. But yeah, it was one of those where like part of the stuff almost got into my nostril, and then that was a nightmare waiting to happen. So I will tell anyone, if you are going on like 2 days without sleep, that might be the only scenario that you guys really might want to do something like that. But otherwise, just learn from my mistakes and do not do that. But now we have to talk about the one thing that I would have never thought is the hardest thing for so many bodybuilders before I started this podcast. It's posing. For a lot
Yes.
of people I talk to, it's harder than the nutrition. It's harder than the training. What has your relationship with posing been like?
Oh my gosh. So I, by nature, am not a very like cutesy or articulated person. I mean, physically. So, if you could imagine, I listen to death metal. So I don't dance. I don't do anything like that. I
She's
like
not doing ballerina routines to death metal.
I'm just very a rigid type of person, like on average. And yeah, I'm just not like a very fluid individual. So it took so much practice and like just being comfortable being uncomfortable. Like I don't like how that looks. It doesn't look good on my body. I'm not moving very fluidly. I would set aside like an hour a day, and I still do it to this day, even though my posing is much better, thankfully, and I teach it now too. And I would say if someone is starting on the journey and you're intimidated by posing, get a posing coach, because you can watch as many YouTube videos as you want. Your body's not going to do what that person's body is doing without another pair of eyes. I don't even care if they're cheap. Just find someone that can help you with it, because it is so hard to make. Because the thing with bodybuilding is it's a bit of an optical illusion, because you're not standing how you would be on a stage in real life. That's just unrealistic.
No one
So
walks around like this, anytime. Yeah,
exactly, yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And especially for the bikini and the wellness posing, a lot of the times, like your hips are facing away from the judges, but your shoulders are facing towards the judges. There's a lot of mobility involved, and you're placating to your strongest angles and your strongest points. So if you have good quads and good glutes, you're trying to accentuate that. So not everyone's routine will look good on you and vice versa. So it is very individualistic and it is very challenging. But once you start getting comfortable with it, it is very fun. It's super fun to be like artistic and let your personality come out with it, and that's where I'm at with my posing journey now. Like I can just like mess with it and have fun with it, because it is kind of like a dance. So
What would you say was the thing that helped you out the most, sort of getting out of that shell? Because you need to have your own personality, need to have your own pizzazz, especially if you're like you're a bikini or wellness competitor. But for any division too, I say this to anyone that I have on from divisions, like you do need to have your sort of own flair, and that's something that a lot of people, you're either born with or you're born without, and then you got to learn it. What would you say is probably one of the biggest things that helped you learn sort of how to express yourself individually, especially in your routine?
I would say getting comfortable with the basics first, so that way you're brave enough to venture outside of it when you're comfortable with it, because they can tell on stage if you're not confident in your routine and if you haven't practiced it very well, obviously. But I would say don't try to add anything fancy in the beginning. And that's how I went about it. I just did your basic mandatories on stage and then enough to get me through comparisons. And it was good enough for a point in time. And then I was like, okay, now it's boring to me. Like I can do your quarter turns, I can do face the front, face the back, like all that stuff. I want to make it look like my own routine. So I would say getting confident in the basics allowed me to branch out and to make it more flowy and poised. So, and then I would say by that point in time, because the way I went about it, I had already done a few shows with just a basic routine, that you're not really intimidated by people looking at you anymore, or like staring at you in the posing room and stuff like that, or just like a normal mirror room at the gym. So you kind of just stop caring if people judge you for doing it. And a lot of the people aren't. They're actually kind of like, what are you doing? Like, that's kind of fascinating. So that helped me too, because you don't feel so embarrassed to do it in public.
I'm not gonna lie. When I was in college, there was a few bodybuilders at my gym, and this is before I even, excuse me, before I even really got into the whole bodybuilding scene. I thought that they were like a bunch of douches. I was like, oh yeah, those are just douches just posing. And then when I finally got to meet them, and obviously they were like the nicest people on the planet, I was like, oh, okay, it's actually for a purpose. But believe the naive me who had only been in the gym, a few dozen times, finally just seeing guys that had to like throw up a front double after every single arm set that they did. And I was like, okay, that's just really vain. But then it's like, no, they're just focusing on that. So again, that's why I like to talk to bodybuilders on the podcast, because so many people in the general public, I think, have that first reaction that I had when they see that stuff going on in the gym and they don't realize that there's a reason for it. Now, obviously, we all know some of those gym bros that literally are just do that just to do that. And they put a bad name to everyone. Believe me, I've met some guys that literally they don't even know how to talk. They just grunt. That's how they communicate with everyone. So then you're like, you are setting everyone back so many years, but
Yeah.
you just have to deal with that. But when you're walking on that stage, what is that moment like for you?
My gosh, it's like a roller coaster. So you know when you're creeping up a roller coaster and then you get to that point where it's about to come down and you're like, well, I can't get off the ride and like we just got to commit now. It's like that for me. It's like a really fun adrenaline rush, because you're prepping for like months at a time, and in your off season, depending on what your feedback is, you're in an off season for like a year and a half. Kind of just depends on like where you're at and what you're trying to improve upon. So to be on the stage, it's like surreal. Like the moment's finally here. I've waited so long to do this, and then in 30 seconds, it's like over. So, but yeah, it is absolutely exhilarating, and it's probably my favorite part of a show is right when they're lining you up and they put you right on the stage before you walk out, and then they call your number, and you're like, all right, let's give them my best show.
That is my second reason, actually, why I really wanted to cover this too, is that you guys put so much effort into it to only be on stage for sometimes like 30 seconds to a minute. Whereas any other sport, if I'm pitching, I'm out there for an hour and a half, basically, at least my time of it. So again, that was the one of the reasons for me. Where I was like, okay, these people are a special kind of people if they're willing to go through that much just for that little amount. But what was your recent feedback from this year, and what are some things that you're working on to improve as you get ready for next year?
Yeah. So my last show I did, it was actually like a year and a half ago.
Oh, okay.
I did bikini, and I have done about 7 shows. That was my seventh show. And then I went to nationals for that show because I won my class at a local show and then went to nationals. And I did not place well at nationals. I don't expect anybody would their first go around, but I did want to experience it mainly because I wanted to see the caliber of athletes. And oh my gosh, people at nationals are so beautiful that it was just, it put a fire under my ass to like really put my work into my off season. But my feedback was my legs and my glutes are too big for bikini now. And so they told me either
Trust
you
me, that's a
can,
good problem to have. I'm just gonna say that straight out.
yeah, and honestly, I've always been like a pretty skinny person up until that point. Like I was muscular, don't get me wrong, but I didn't realize how much was in here until I started training for them specifically. And I've always been the tall, skinny person, 5'9". I've never really had the blessed genetics for that except for running. But what they told me was you could either catabolize some muscle because your upper body's fine, but we need to bring down the quads, the hamstrings, and the glutes. Or you can take the time you need and grow them and just switch categories from bikini into wellness because it was relatively new at that time. But I'd say it's been around for like 5 years at that point. And it's still being defined, I guess. And my strife with that is I've not found a wellness girl who is as tall as I am. A lot of wellness girls are like 5'2", 5'4". I think the tallest one I've met is 5'6". And as you know, shorter bodies and taller bodies just distribute muscle differently, and we look very different. But that's kind of been like my standpoint is I'm curious to see when I'm on stage next to the 5'6" girls how I'm going to hold up.
I was gonna say, yeah, it really isn't until figure that I've talked to some guests that are like either 6 feet tall or close to 6 feet. But yeah, with wellness, yeah, I myself have never even talked to a wellness competitor, yeah, that is really that tall. So it's, and I've always had the opinion of when it comes to height things, they should really be judged separately. Because like, if you're standing
Yeah,
next to someone that's 5 feet tall and you're 5'9", that's a completely different type of body type. Like, it's not.
yeah.
Yeah, that's always been
I
my
would
pet peeve.
argue both ways too. I would say that like I would say the shorter or classes for these categories, they just fill out so beautifully. But then you also have cases where someone like my husband or like Chris Bumstead, who's 6'1", 6'2",
Yeah,
and they just dwarf people while they're on
I
stage.
was gonna say
And
your
it's
husband might have it even worse, especially being 6'2". Good God. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's hard to not look at them as opposed to everybody else. Now, mind you, luckily in wellness, and he does classic physique, they're not really judging size. To some extent, they are, but also it's flow, it's symmetry, it's poise, it's the whole package, which is thank God, because I would say I learned for wellness that most other categories, like for bikini, there's categories for 6'2" chicks. Like they have class H, class I, like crazy stuff. Wellness stops at D, and I think D is like 5'6" and above. So I've not really ever been on stage with someone who is significantly shorter than me because I've always been categorized by my height. So that's going to be interesting, but I'm really excited for it because I know it's not a size game at the end of the day. So it'll be fun.
Well, and you do have an Instagram channel that I will plug. Everyone, go and give her a follow there. But one thing that I found so great about Instagram is that, it's without Instagram, I wouldn't even have the show. That's how I connect with people. That's how it's all gotten to be. But on the negative side, being a sport where you are constantly compared to other people, do you ever sometimes struggle to not compare yourself to others, especially on Instagram where people are posting their best photos at their best angles? They might be editing their photos. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but let's be honest, there's a lot of that going around. But do you ever have a hard time dealing with that? And if you do, how do you try to placate that and not just go crazy? Because if I were to compete, I would fall completely down that rabbit hole where I'd be like, oh my God, this guy looks amazing. I can't step on stage with him. Look at that. And then I realized that like, oh, it's just a doctored photo that he took on perfect lighting and a perfect time right after he got a pump.
Yeah, to be honest with you, great question and fun story that goes with it. It is very hard. In bikini, not so much because at least in bikini, you can tell if someone's really tall and then it's more fair to compare your physique. Not really because you're just built differently than someone else, but it seemed fair in my head. But getting into the wellness category, it is like detrimental to like, I follow a bunch of wellness girls on Instagram because they're just beautiful, let's be honest. And but you do compare yourself to them. You're like, man, I don't look like that from that side angle, or like my quads don't hang like that from this side all the way. So it can be really damning for your progress. What helped me with it, to be completely honest with you, is going to shows. So because I'm a coach and we go to a lot of our athlete shows, you see these people in real life, and don't get me wrong, they're absolutely stunning. They look great, but Instagram is just a beast. Like people, I wouldn't even argue that their photos are doctored, although I do know that that happens. It's just that it's hard to see because you don't see them in comparison to like objects like seats and doors, and like you just see them in an environment that's nice and open. And of course it's like a portrait mode, so everything else is fuzzed in the background or something, and you get their best angle, best lighting. They usually are right after a pump, and then you see them in real life and you're like, oh, you're literally a normal person, you're just very muscular. Like that's all it is.
That
So that kind of helps.
sorry. Well, I was gonna say that was 100% what happened to me when I went to that first show, where I was just like, it's like coming down to reality, where you're like, oh my god, yeah. Like, and like I said, being a taller person, that was a huge thing too. But you're just like, yeah, these people are just, they might be a little bit more muscular than any people that you might see at your own gym, but like still, they're just normal people that
People.
have good angles and stuff every once in a while. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I have had probably one or two moments where I've seen that one person where you're like, okay, Instagram was not lying. You're like, okay, this is bullshit. Like I can't deal with that. I've had that twice, but one of them, the guy was literally like 6'4" and he was probably like 280 pounds. Like it was just ridiculous, where I was just like, it's just like, dude, don't even stand, because he was watching his girlfriend, I think, compete too, and he had to be at the table right next to me, and I almost wanted to go up to him and be like, I appreciate what you look like, but don't stand next to me. Don't be next to me because I'm feeling really bad right now.
I'll be with that.
Yeah, well, especially because I was entertaining other guests that I've had on before, because they were sitting at the same table as me, and then I was like, I'm trying to like look like I at least train, because I train, but I'm not a bodybuilder. But like I'm trying to look like I got something at least. So it's really hard for that. But again, yeah, it's just it's all part of the whole mental game of the sport, which is just something that just love to bring up. But as you can tell from my eyes, sleep is something that I sometimes struggle with, especially when it comes to getting that proper amount. Do you struggle with that at all? Well, obviously, when you're on prep, you probably do, because I have met one person that didn't, and that person, I wanted to sign them up for some psychiatric help afterwards, because if you're not struggling with sleep during a prep, I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's going on here? But how do you try to mitigate that and get the proper amount of sleep? Because I'm not going to lie, I got up at, well, it would be 10 a.m. your time, but like noon my time, and I went to bed at midnight last night, just because I'd been averaging 3 hours of sleep the last like 4 nights for the holidays. So I finally caught up. It got to the point where I was like, oh my god, I almost overslept a 1 p.m. podcast my time. But so how do you deal with the whole sleep conundrum?
Oh, good question again. I don't handle sleep very well. I've never slept well. I've had issues with sleep almost my entire life. Even doing running and stuff like that, you'd think it would exhaust you. And I was tired, but my brain just doesn't like to turn off when I go to bed. I try to work around it by not lifting too late. And if I do take stimulants, it's early enough in the day. But let's be honest, that's just not going to happen all the time. So he and I have our own business. And then I have two like small side businesses that I do on the side of that. So erring on the side of I'm just overly productive at times, I forget that sleep is a thing. And I'll be working, and next thing you know, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. And you're like, I need to go to bed. So I definitely need to prioritize it more, although I do try my hardest to do it now. I've learned some supplements help with it, but really not too much, especially if you have just an overactive brain, slight anxiety problems. I'm just constantly thinking about the next day. So I try my best that if I'm tired, I don't train that day because it's just not productive to do so. I'll take an extra rest day, or I'll swap my rest days. If I catch myself getting sleepy in the middle of the day, I'll try to take like a 20-minute nap if I can afford it, and like just catch up on sleep that way. But for the most part, sleep is just not my friend.
I unfortunately am that type of hyper where you could probably tell that I have a pretty big case of ADD just from talking to me, but I have that type where I have probably taken 3 naps my entire life, just because I can't. I'll just sit there and I'll close my eyes and nothing will happen. Now, I might get a little bit more rested just because your eyes are closed and you're kind of relaxing a little bit, but yeah, I mean, there have been times, because I have my regular job as well, where I'll get really into editing like 1 or 2 podcasts together, and then I'll look outside and the sun is coming up and I'm like, oh crap. Yeah. You get that hyperfocus in and you're like, wait,
Yes.
7 hours have gone by now, and I started work here at 10 o'clock. It's now 5 a.m. and I got work in 7 hours now. So it's something that you really gotta. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Interesting you mentioned. I just learned I have ADHD, which makes a lot of sense when I look back at all the things I used to struggle with when I was younger, especially in school. But I've learned more than anything, what I struggle with is I have a very toxic relationship with productivity. And that's why I think I can't relax. Because if I'm relaxing, like my brain will tell me 1,000 things I could have done for the 20 minutes I was just sitting down doing nothing. And so I have it where I almost have to force myself to like stop what I'm doing for 5 minutes to like go eat food or like get my meals in or something like that, go to the gym and whatnot, and then convince myself that rest is productive, because if I don't stop.
So like I was telling you, I do 3 podcasts, and each of them probably takes up anywhere between 10 to 15 hours a week, each of them.
Wow.
And then I have my regular job that takes up about 50 hours a week. I understand what you're talking about when it comes to the productivity thing, where I've had my family 2 years ago did like an intervention where they sat me down. They're like, we're afraid you're going to burn yourself out to death and like have a heart attack. And I'm just like, believe me, I know. So that's when I slowed down. I used to publish like 3 of these podcasts just for this podcast alone a week. Now I'm down to 2 and usually 1, especially like as we get close to the holidays. But yeah, that's something that I struggled with as well, where you're just, when you're not doing something, like, believe me, if I were to, I don't have another podcast until like 8 hours from now tonight, but if I had like even, let's say, a podcast 2 hours from when I was talking to you, those 2 hours would be hell, because I'd just be sitting here just being like, because it's not, well, it's one of those things too. It's like, if I go to edit something, I want to be able to do it in just one go. I don't want to have to do like half of it and then have to stop and then do it again. I just like
Yep.
to get it done. So if it's like, oh, 2 hours isn't enough to get everything all edited, so then literally, yeah, you're just sitting there and you're just like, God. There've been times where I've texted people where I was like, okay, I'm ready, and I know we're like an hour early, but like, is there any possible way that like you can go? And normally they're nice about it, but yeah, exactly. So it's, yeah, that's the whole conundrum. But being that you said you are a coach right now, and I love to, like, we talked about the coach issue just a little bit, but one thing with coaching is that, like you said, there's a lot of bad coaches, and I think there's honestly more bad coaches than there are good coaches, just because it's so saturated with coaches. But when it comes to your own personal case, what to you makes a coach a good coach? Because it does differ from person to person, but I love to ask people that just to get a general gist of that. And so when people are asking me, like, what do I look for in a coach? Because as someone who's never competed, I just say, hey, here's my poll results, basically, from me asking all these guests what their good qualities in coach are. So if you were to get your ideal coach, what would the qualities that you would like to have them have?
So I would say, well, obviously someone who's well educated with this background, because there's a lot that goes into this that is incredibly science based. And if you don't have some sort of schooling or background or training in this, you're not going to really understand the full depth of it or be able to explain to your athlete why they're doing what they're doing and why it's not working. So I would say being able to have and showcase that you're well educated in your sport, and then the ability to communicate. Because I had a lot of times where with my old coaches and whatnot, it was a need to know basis, and that doesn't work for me. I'm a very macro aspect kind of person. I need to see the whole picture to understand why I'm doing the small things in between. So it may be annoying, but you got to talk to me. I got to know why, what's happening, what's going on, what's the game plan to get there. You can't keep me in the dark like that.
Which is what you should be, I should say, because there's too many times where people have made that mistake of, yes, sir, I'll do whatever you say, and just then it leads them down to bad things. But yeah, my number one thing, ask questions. So I had to interrupt you there right there just because that is something that I wish and I plead people to do more.
Yes, I agree. And then I would say another good trait to look for as well is humility. Like I would need someone to be able to tell me, like, I don't know that. Let me do some research on it. Or I would need someone to be like, you know what? When I was younger, I messed this up too. So let me not let you do that. And also being able to understand that, like, at the end of the day, athletes are athletes, but they are people, and prioritizing their mental health is a very huge part of this sport because one, there's so many diverse backgrounds that people get into and whys and hows for bodybuilding. And not everyone has a support system. Not everyone has a family that like allows them to do what they want to do. Some people are by themselves. There's just so many different cases. But one thing that we've learned and why I say like your coach needs to care about where your mental's at to make this sport happen is so many people will have like breakdowns. This can turn into an eating disorder if you're not handling your person carefully. And that you just have to know how to handle people in the depths of a prep or even an off season, I would argue is probably where I'm the most supportive for my athletes because going from shredded to not shredded and allowing gains to happen can be very traumatizing for a human being. So someone who does not put your mental well-being first is a big red flag in my opinion. Or if they tell you to like shut up and suck it up, like the bodybuilding's just hard, you're just supposed to suffer, like absolutely not. That shit needs to go. So
Have you ever thought about just going back to school and getting your psychology degree and just becoming a therapist? Because that's honestly what you are as a coach. Like it really is. When I think about it, it's like, God, you're a psychologist and you're just making way less than you should be making then.
absolutely. And to be honest with you, I love that part of my job. I'm a big people person. I love talking to people and knowing the whys and the whats behind someone's workings for their brain. But I do agree because sometimes I do feel ill equipped for it. And obviously, sometimes conversations do get so severe where there's really nothing you can do as a coach. It's like, hey, I think our next step is like professional help. That's not happened to me, fortunately, but I've seen it. So I would say yes. I went to school. I went to Cal Poly Pomona. I have my degree in biotechnology, which honestly does not apply to bodybuilding at all. I mean, in some extent it does because you understand like microbiology and nutrition and things like that. But I wish I learned more about the psychology aspect way earlier on.
She's in better shape than me, and she's strong. She's probably stronger than me in some areas, and she's smarter than me. So yeah, this is Ryan
Oh, no.
Johnson here signing. No, I always, but like, yeah, I was a business major myself. I literally just went to college just to go to college. Honestly, if I'm being completely honest, I was one of those people where it's like, and my student loan has really been supportive of that too. So I really appreciate that. But before we get into all that, and this just becomes a depressing podcast, which by the way, it didn't become one, which I'm glad for one of these, especially looking outside at the weather. But if someone were to walk up to you and say, we made a decision, you can change one thing about the sport of bodybuilding, and everyone would go along with it. And it can even be more than one, because I know some people like have a long list. But if you could change something about the sport and everyone would go along with it, what would be one thing that you'd like to see changed?
Okay, so my biggest pet peeve right now is very technical, but it's how conditioned they have their athletes come in. I think it is so dangerous because you have a group of people, a very small percentage of people that are willing to push the envelope so unbelievably far that they don't care if it's detrimental to their health. They don't care if it puts them on their deathbed and in the hospital. Like, they will do whatever it takes to go as far as they can. And I would argue some people almost enjoy that part of it, that it is dangerous. So I would say a lot of the time, for example, one of the girls I follow that competes, her feedback has always come in more conditioned, but she's a bikini athlete, and bikini athletes aren't supposed to be incredibly conditioned. They're muscular, but they're softer looking, and they have, your feminine hourglass figure. And she had like striated delts, like veins crawling up her abs, quad separation, like not what a bikini athlete, the level that she needed to be pushed to. And her feedback from the judges was, oh, you have to come in more conditioned. And I'm like, what? They're going to take that so seriously, especially for a woman in our hormones and what they do and don't allow us to do, that they're going to start taking stuff to a very serious level that it's irreversible. And I do believe that's why so many people in the sport recently are like dying, because they're not really putting a cap on how far these people should push themselves to step on stage. The men, even more so, because the men's categories, you're supposed to come in so unbelievably shredded and conditioned and hard that it's just inhuman to look that way. So that would be the first thing I would hope changes, is that a lot of people getting sick and like ruining their longevity to do this sport is a lot of the times because of judge feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be completely honest. Two of the guests I talked to, and they were both mainstays that I had on multiple times. They passed away these last 2 months, and they were both under 40. And it was just, and they were the first ones. I hate to say this, but like I was shocked that it took this long for that to happen. But it did
Wow.
happen. But like it is one of those things where after every single time that happens, I honestly like think to myself like, am I really doing the right thing, shedding a light on this lifestyle that encourages that? But then I realized that like I just need to keep shedding a light on how to not do it the right way, but how to not do it the wrong way, basically, and just
Yeah.
and I appreciate
Or
you.
how to do it the smart way. Because, like, if
Yeah,
you're going to be honest, like, obviously, if there's drugs involved, the more serious and professional you become in this sport, it's just inevitable. But there is a way to do it that you're not putting someone's health like on the line and brink of death. But a lot of people, especially that are coaches, don't care. They're like, here's a stack. You're going to mix all these things together, and you're going to run it for as long as we need to. There was one person I was speaking to recently at a gym. He competes on and off in the masters category. I think he's like 45, and he's on stuff. And he recently told me that he hopped off of his gear and he's in an off season. And I asked him like, "Oh, so what are you doing for TRT?" He's like, "Oh, I'm not doing TRT." And I'm like, okay, one, you're a masters athlete. You absolutely need to be doing TRT. But the fact that there was just like such a drastic drop in his protocol, I was thinking like, this is what's dangerous about it. People who don't know what they're talking about, this is what's dangerous about it. So I would hope, on top of the conditioning aspect, like if gear's going to be involved in the sport, there needs to be an education in it. Like, people just need to know how to do it and how to do it smartly.
you honestly, I think you should kind of like for some states where if you want to own a firearm, you have to like take a class and then do all that stuff.
Yeah.
That should honestly be a thing too, because again, I have nothing against people doing it. I know it's a huge part of it, but to me, it's like you just need to be educated, because so many times like people have just gone in feet first without doing any research, and then they're stuck with stuff for the rest of their lives. But I will say my only one pet peeve about that is like the people that are so young and they start doing all that
Yeah.
stuff. And like I've talked to girls that are like 19 years old, and it's like you should be out partying in college, not doing the stuff that you're doing. Now, again, you can be competing and stuff like that, but when it comes to some of the stuff that you take when you become a competitor when you're 19, it's like gotta. So that's my whole 2 cents right there too. But I mean, yeah, it's a tricky subject, especially in this sport, because it is, a lot of people just they don't talk about it as much as I honestly think they should. But there's obviously reasons for that. But
Yeah.
if someone were to also walk up to you and say, I'm really just thinking about getting in shape and I don't really know how to do it, especially as we are getting, I mean, we're recording this a few days before New Year's, and those goddamn New Year's resolutioners are going to ruin the gym for the first 2 weeks. I hate them. But again, they are trying to better themselves. So, yada, yada. But what advice do you have for someone who are just wants to get started working out?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I would have them decide like what the goal is. Like, okay, what is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to get stronger? Are you trying to put on muscle mass? Are you just looking to lose a few pounds? Because when you have a goal, it's much easier to hit than not having one. It's like throwing darts at a blind target. Like you need to see what you're looking at and then stick to it. Like if you know, okay, I want to get stronger, pick a very simple protocol, one that isn't like overcomplicated, and set yourself up to achieve obtainable goals. Don't set this like crazy goal by like, oh, in 4 months, I'm going to do a crazy squat or something like that. Like take it week by week, day by day. And then most importantly, track your progress. If you're tracking your weights, take progress pictures because you're not going to see things happen very quickly in the beginning. Maybe if you're a newbie, you might, but it still is easier to appreciate your progress when you see it side by side. Because I would argue once that like flame of, oh, I'm going to get started and do this burns out and the discipline has to take over, and hopefully it does, not seeing progress can be very deterring. So if you track it and you can look back at it, it motivates you to continue on the path that you're on, especially as a beginner.
God, I'm almost drooling thinking about those newbie gains, and God,
I know.
I wish they would last forever. Just when you see someone young starting in the gym, you're like, enjoy it while it lasts, hot shot. You got about 3 months,
Yeah,
and then next thing you know, you're in here like the rest of us. But
it only gets harder from here, okay?
oh my God, yeah, I mean, that is, yeah, I can't even say anything more. But before we do wrap things up, we do have to talk about, body dysmorphia. It is so prevalent in this sport, which is one thing that shocked me because this is the 19-year-old version of myself. If I get big and strong, I'm never going to have any like thoughts about, like, oh, I look kind of like a freak being 6'3" and I only weighed like 160 pounds. If I put on, some muscle, everything would be fine. One of the dumbest things I've ever thought in my life. Now, it was in good intentions, but when you realize that the more stronger and bigger you get, for a lot of people, myself included, the worse it gets. But how do you deal with that? Because some people might laugh when you tell them that you have body dysmorphia when they're like, you really? Like, look in the damn mirror. How do you deal with that whole conundrum of, nothing really solves body dysmorphia, honestly.
To be honest with you, we both struggle with it. My husband and I are like almost equally as bad with each other. And thank God we have each other because I would say like you would think your significant other is going to be biased, but we're both pretty straightforward and blunt with each other, and we'll be honest, and that's helpful. But I mean, I struggle with it to this day. I don't really have an answer to get over it. Something that I have learned is I try to use it as a tool, as in I'm not lacking. Like they're built differently than I am, or I have all of these asymmetries from injuries and like all this stuff, and like you're working with what you've got, and there's not much I can do to change it other than keep trying. But I would say, oh, that's a tricky one because it riddles me every day. Like I'll catch myself, especially in gym mirrors, because they're all different. So like one from far away, you're like a string bean, and I'm like, I know I'm more jacked than that. And then the other one, I'm like 3 feet shorter, and I'm like, what is happening? What do I actually look like? I don't know. But I would say for me, something that does help me get over it is using it as a tool that at least I know I'm never satisfied, and that I mean I'm proud of what I've accomplished, but I'll always want more, and I'm okay with that because it just pushes me to be a better athlete and to like keep competing against myself at the end of the day because I got to make her happy, and that's pretty much what I'm concerned with the majority of the time.
I will say I did wish a gym once would replace it with like one of those funny mirrors that you get like the carnival houses just to see how people would react. But yeah, it is a never ending. And I will say when your husband was on like right before we started recording, and I was tempted to say the most insulting thing you could ever say to a bodybuilder as a joke. You're looking a little small today, which I realize just destroys a body. Like anyone, I said this a million times, but if you ever want to insult someone, like if you bodybuilders are normally some of the nicest people, but if they do ever wrong you, you just walk up to them. This is what I do all the time. You walk up to them, you whisper in their ear. You don't have to touch them. Looking a little small today, and then you disappear. You don't even
Yeah.
they don't even see you. You
Or
just run away.
pick one body part, like the
That
one that's
too.
the biggest. They'll be like, "Hey, your calves are looking a little small today," and then
That
walk
too.
away.
You will mind f them for at least a solid week. Now again, that's if you're that
Don't
kind of
do that.
person, I was gonna say I could never do that myself. I'm just a little bit too nice if I'm being completely honest. But like, if you're that kind of person, you know, go for it. But before we wrap things up here, is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Oh my gosh, I can think of so many people I'd love to give a
Take your
shout
time.
out to. Well, one, my husband, because he has an Instagram too and all that kind of
I'll
stuff.
link that
But
down below as well.
he's awesome. Yeah, He's single-handedly like the hardest working person I know, and he's the last person to give himself credit for it. And I think he deserves to know that, you're an awesome human being. And I need you to understand that. And then I'm not going to name them all because I think some of them want their privacy, but all of my clients, oh my gosh, if it weren't for them, like I wouldn't be where I am and I wouldn't be the coach that I am today. And because I want them to be better athletes, it makes me a better athlete. And then my coach, because she's phenomenal. Well, it's a team, but they're phenomenal.
Absolutely. Now, again, everyone, like I said before, I'll leave a link to both their Instagram page and even your coaches as well. I'll leave a link to all that stuff down below. Buyer beware, you will get off that couch and stop, eating all those Twinkies, even though as great as that does sound. But again, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your journey. It was an absolute delight to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was so fun. I appreciate this opportunity so much.
Absolutely. Well, I did forget to ask. I asked this at the end. So when we do have you on a year from now, because I'd love to talk to you in a year just to see where you've been at, what are some goals that you'd like to have achieved and where would you like to be at a year from today?
Oh my gosh. I hope to not live in California anymore. And I hope to have my pro card by that point.
Any place in particular that you're looking to move to?
Right now, Oregon. That's why we
Okay.
visited earlier. So
I was gonna say if you said somewhere in the Midwest, I'd be like, God, you're an idiot. But no, at least
okay.
you're staying in somewhat warmer of weather. I mean,
Pacific
it's not.
Northwest.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's still kind of warm, over there. But yeah, I've had some people that have decided like, oh yeah, I'm gonna move to Minnesota or Wisconsin. You're like,
So,
why? What are you doing? And they're the morons that visit here during the summer when. I'm not gonna lie, the
um,
summer here is the best time out of any place on the planet because it's like California's year round, except we actually have like wind and rain every once in a while and stuff like that. But like once you get to the winter, it's like, good God, you guys are morons for staying here. But again, I don't want to trash anyone as we get closer to wrap things up here. But again, follow her on her Instagram page and everyone else will leave a link down below. And again, you guys, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing off. Have a great day, everyone.